say, and then Friday night you go over to the tavern again, and we were lucky we'd get the odd shift at the pulp mill.
And what would you do there?
Hope you just survive. You'd have a wall, total maybe 40 feet, 50 feet, and it'd be like a big cavern. And coming down the front of it would be these beams that would have been 4 inches thick by maybe 20. And that would hold in your wood, and we call that the wood loft. So the wood would come over from the Barker in the other side of the road in Nelson, come up a big chute, and then it would drop into these areas where wood was stored. And from there, you would take a pickaroon, handle with and put the wood into these 4 by 4 holes in the cement floor, and down they would drop into grinders. The grinders would grind up the pulp, the pulpwood, and then it would become pulp, and they wash it a bit and screen it. But that's what it was like, and so we get on there as a call shift, and you might get, if you were lucky, you might get 2 shifts on a weekend, Friday and Saturday night from beg your pardon, from I think 12 to 8, I think. Yeah, 8-hour shifts. So you're lucky to get 2 shifts, and they paid you, like back then, probably 14 bucks an hour. And at that time, that was good money. So if you got a check with 2 shifts, you'd go and you'd line up at the office there in the pulp mill in Nelson. You'd pick up your check, and then you'd line up the credit union, and they'd cash it, right? And then you'd go over to the beer store and pick up some beer. And if you had 2 checks in your pocket for the following weekend, you had it made. You were golden.
Boys.
But it was very hard work, and some of the stones would cut very fast, and when they did, your wood would drop into these, they were called magazines, 4 foot by 4 foot. And you had to fill these up continually without interruption. And if that stone was cutting hard at the bottom and grinding up the pulpwood fast, you had to fill that steady, and you earned your money, to be honest.
Imagine.
And and we worked in the Barker, and I remember working over there, and the smell of the Barker was left something to be desired, because there was a lot of old bark laying around decomposing.
Ugh.
And then at that time, wood was pretty big. Because it had to be, because you were trying to, fill up these holes with a pickaroon, and you couldn't have wood that small. You need something like that.
Big enough.
The only way to do it. And of course, the province brought in Crown Lands and Forests Act in '82, I think, and it said, okay, this tree is this long, this is going to the sawmill, this is going to the pulp supply. So your wood got a little smaller as the 80s went on. But anyway, in the Barker, there was like they called a sorting table, and the Barker would rotate the big drums that would be 30 feet high and 50 feet long, and they would have wood that went into them, fed into them on a conveyor from outside. When pulp trucks would show up, they'd take up the wood, throw it on a conveyor, which would have a saw, and cut it up in 4 foot lengths. If this would come in at 8 feet, and then that would go into these drums to take the bark off. The bark would go onto a conveyor belt, and then your job was to take any logs, pulpwood off the conveyor that had the bark on it. So anyway, there was one fella, and he was rough and ready. I doubt that he made it through high school. Strong as a bear. And anyway, there was one big piece of wood. It was probably as like that, and I couldn't do it. And he'd say, "Come here, little buddy, I'll help you out." He'd just take that with his pickaroon. He'd just throw that where it had to go, just like it was just nothing. And then he was to you when you weren't thinking, and he'd just grab you by the head because he could stick your head right underneath his armpits, and it just almost pass out. But he would help you as much as you needed help. And like I say, we worked there some nights, and It's pretty hard at times, but we liked the money at that age, and it gave us enough money to do, what we wanted. And usually on the weekends, my father had a tourism car, but we could never drive that. So we'd have to wait for somebody else around in our little gaggle of friends to come up with a car to take us over to get a case of beer. And back in a friend had a woodlot in South Nelson. And we went back there, and his grandfather was still alive, and he showed us how to build a log cabin. So we built one.
Wow.
And we'd go back there and carry a case of beer back in one hand, and I don't know, salami in the other, bologna or whatever, and you go back there for the night, and I'd just have a few beers and play cards, and just outdoors all the time outdoors, swimming or whatever, boating or going back to that camp, or always outdoors. Right now I can't even understand how kids do what they do when they're indoors so much.
It's a whole different ballgame, whole different mentality as well.
It has to be. It has to be.
Yeah. Well, they a lot of times they have to look after themselves, right? Both parents have to work, and
Yeah,
so,
well, I suppose at the time we didn't have that option. I mean, I remember a TV probably in the early 70s, it was secondhand, and the tube was huge, and it would heat up, and it would, this picture would get smaller, and we'd have to turn it off. And someone would yell, "The TV's gone," and someone else would run up and turn it off to let the picture tube cool down so that we could watch TV. And we only had two stations, CBC and ATV, CTV / and one of the towers that broadcast was up in Upsaquitch, up around Ball Mountain. And we'd always, when one of the stations would be too fuzzy, we'd always say that that tower must be down now. Because it was all coming through the air. There was nothing like cable, no internet, that didn't exist.
no. The bunny ears.
Yes.
Bunny
exactly,
ears.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah.
remember the bunny ears.
So, that was the technology at the time. And
Yep.
I remember the old rotary dial telephone.
Yeah.
And when we got a push button phone in the kitchen, I don't know, say 78, well, that was pretty fancy stuff. And, if you had cable, which we did when it arrived, if you had 12 stations or whatever, well, you were talking about pretty good technology there.
Big wigs. 12 stations with big wigs.
And if you're lucky, you had a color TV, but we didn't have one for quite a while. But a neighbor's kid, parents had one, and we used to go over there, watch TV. And every Saturday morning, you watch cartoons, and we'd get kind of crazy ideas. Like, we'd watch cartoons where you had the rooster and Roadrunner going against each other. They drop anvils on their head and throw a cannonball at each other or something like that. So one of our friends got the idea, well, geez, his father raised chickens. And he lived in a big old house, rambling, huge house with a huge veranda on the top, on the side of it rather, in the front. So he said, geez, these chickens can kind of fly. If I put one in each hand, I might be able to jump and fly. So he jumped off the rail and bang, down he went. He didn't fly.
He did bluff. No one's seen that coming though, right? Everyone thought he would.
No, the way we thought was, if we can think it, it must be good.
Fair.
Another saying that one of my friends had, we'd be thinking something, planning something, scheming something. What could go wrong? And of course, most of the time it was friggin' wrong. It went
Famous
wrong.
last words right there.
So, in the late 70s and early 80s, the economy was bad, and I remember my father would kind of be administrator of some grants, and he applied for some grants. One of them was to go to the tip of the island and clear with the brush there. My sister was on that, and other people as well. But these grants were put in because people couldn't get enough UI stamps to get through the winter.
Oh.
So it was either go on a grant or run under the UI and go on welfare. So that was the choice of a lot of families at the time. Mm-hmm. And the economy was really, really bad there. So, but somehow, you look at the rules were different, and you could do a lot more than you ever could now and get away with it, and nobody would bat an eyelash at you.
Yep.
Right? It was
The good old days.
well, it was more freedom, but it was tougher. You know, it was tougher to survive
Build character though.
if you survived.
Look at all the character you have. Go on.
So, you know, my twin brother and I graduated in '82, somehow, some way. Don't know. School was just something you did, and looking back, I should have probably paid a little more attention to the sciences. Anyway, so a lot of Catholics, Irish Catholics, would go over to St. Thomas. And I went over there for a year, and I thought, philosophy, what the hell am I studying this for? What am I going to do with this? So I said, no, that's not for me. So I went into forestry, Bachelor of Science, and that was a big mistake because you had to learn calculus, and my math wasn't that great, and chemistry was kind of weak there. But anyway, which reminds me, there was one teacher in high school at James and Hill, he hated Nelsoners. Well, we just hated him back. So we had a car one night, and we were driving around where he was. We knew where he lived. All right, what are we gonna do? So we drove that car across his lawn through a hedge, and by God, he was some mad Monday morning. He couldn't prove we did it, but he knew who did it.
Oh, that's bad.
Yeah, it is bad. Yeah, it is bad. I have to apologize for that. You know, if you're the grandson of him, I'm sorry about that. We're just crazy kids.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went to forestry, and I didn't do well because I didn't have a background in math or sciences. Fine. So I had an older brother that was there in the woodlands down at now called Arbec. So they needed some people to go into the woods and do some compass work and run lines for cutting blocks and whatnot. And so I was second nature to being in the woods. I mean, I could have doubled as a bear at times because that's where I was happiest, and that's where I'm still happiest. So anyway, got me on there for some of the plantations as well, and there was a crowd of tree planters from Rogersville. Women, all of them. And they were tough as nails because you'd had to put this strap over your shoulder and put in probably, I don't know, 100 trees, and we'd soak them with water so they would stay moist so they wouldn't dry out. And then we had black horseflies there, and they used Raid for insect repellent. Sprayed right on themselves, right on them. Tough. Jeepers. And every Friday afternoon we'd work a little faster, and so would they, because we'd go to the tavern in Rogersville. Most of them were from Rogersville area, so we'd all go in there, and that's what it was like. You would all go in there and have a couple of beer, and then drive from Rogersville into Miramichi and not think twice about it. Yeah. Anyway,
Interesting.
so I have a lot of respect for those girls in Rogersville. Toughest girls I ever met in my life. So, but anyway, I went into the woodlands and loved that, run around the woods and using the compass and map as, you know.
Right up your alley.
Yeah, yep, not that hard once you learn it. And then I applied to the Forest Ranger School in '84, '85, I think. And went into Forest Ranger School in January of '84, '85. And but you kind of like that actually, and but it was awful hard. You had to study right until midnight, 1 a.m. in the morning, almost every night. And I got to know a fella that lived up in Red Bank that was really, really smart, and we had to do surveying math on paper, longhand, and it was just horrible. I hated it.
Wow.
And he could pick that up just like that. So you got to know people that were good in tree identification, people that knew forestry good as far as fighting forest fires or surveying or any of that. There's always a few in this class that were really good at it because that's what their minds worked at. So you worked in study groups in the evening and did what you had to do. So one of the courses that was there was tree identification and scaling. Yeah. Not so hard. So I did really well in that, and then that summer I wrote my scaler's exam. I passed. So I worked full time at that mill in the scaling department, and trucks would come in that had roughly 18 cord of wood on it. Not now, where they're double trailers and probably have 30, and probably are just weighed. I don't think they would ever have people that had a scaling stick that would take the average height and then take out any defects or holes or whatever. I don't think that happens now. It's all by weight. So from there I went, okay, well I was making pretty good money there, and but then.
Holder.
What?
But did you graduate forestry school?
I never went back.
You never went back. You got your job and you're on your way.
I was there for the money, and once I got the money, I said, I'm not going back. It's true.
Well, it is what, but you ended up getting a job out of it anyway, right? So because of it, okay. That's what I'm wondering. I'm like, I think you got the forestry, but I didn't know for sure. Okay, here we go.
So in '85, I believe, they started building the paper machine #1. So one of my boyhood friends was a draftsman that worked on that to put up the structural steel for the paper mill, and I think also for the shed down on the wharf in Newcastle. Anyway, at the time, Miramichi Leader was sponsoring the Miramichi Raft Race. What's that? That's about 100 rafts, maybe more, stocked full of drunken people floating from the Morrissey Bridge down to basically the Hooper. It was insane. Wild. So for a couple of weeks we built this raft. One year we had a 2-story raft. You could either be in the first floor or on the second floor.
No. Someone's got to bring back the raft race.
Yeah. It was insane. And you'd work on that. We left it in behind my parents' house, and we'd get down there at 8 o'clock, and you'd have beer all set out, and a few would open the beer at 8 o'clock. That's the way it was. And we'd float the raft down, and we'd kind of aim it as best we could to the Morrissey Bridge, and then other people would join us that saw us on the Morrissey Bridge, and it was a huge party, and I have no idea why people didn't drown. I don't understand it. And you'd float down, so if you ever had a drink on the water, for some reason, it hit you really, really hard, okay? So we'd be floating down for 4 or 5 hours, trying to get down to the Hooper, and really didn't give a shit if we got down there at all. We didn't care. So, but we were kind of in dead water, or slack water, that was there by the cement plant down there in Chatham. So there was a boat over there. We're all pretty well in the bag, let's be honest. I had relatives with me, I had an uncle with me. He was pretty straight-laced. He was in the Navy. God, he wasn't straight-laced that day. So anyway, there was a boat over there, and he started waving at him. Hey, come on over and give us a tow. Give us a tow. We can barely see, eh? Gets a little closer. Jesus, it's the RCMP. Go back. We don't need you. Go back.
Oh my God.
But they couldn't arrest us because there was another 500 people around us that were in the same situation, totally hammered. Safety equipment? Are you crazy? No bailers, life jackets? Get the heck out of here. We had none of that crap. Neither did most of anybody else.
Fair. Oh
So,
my God. It's no wonder when you say
wow.
we made it out alive.
But it wasn't just us. It was just
Yeah.
that's what the river did. That's the true raw character of the Miramichi really come out there, and people got together and they built a raft, put old oil barrels underneath it, and put her together, and got some of the friends and relatives, and rode down the current and drank for 4 or 5 hours. And that's what happened.
Sounds fun.
So we did that, and that was a great time. But I think the leader had to give it up because of insurance issues, liability.
Oh, well, great liability came into play.
So I think they had to give it up, but my gosh, it was a great time. Great time. And I'm glad I lived through that. That was good. So this was now 85, 86. They built the first paper machine. And Danny, so then George Petty got the idea, who was the owner of Repap. Oh, and before that, Joe O'Neill was a woodlands manager at the Groundwood Mill. So at the time in '85, I think Repap was part ownership of that mill in Nelson, and they thought, well, what can we do here? Oh, there's a mill across there that produces craft pulp, and the Groundwood uses groundwood. Groundwood is much more of a filler, but to make the best paper, you need to have a combination of groundwood and craft, because the craft fibers are much stronger, so they make a better sheet. So they bought the mill over there that originally started as Fraser's, and then they put up in paper machine number 1. So people started making a lot of money there in the construction and the paper mill itself. And then they said, okay, we'll build a second paper machine. And this was a fast paper machine, huge. And I don't know what that cost, probably 300 million, 400 million at the time. That's a lot of money. So, okay, they built that, and they had a big party over there. They had these tents they rented, and they had dignitaries like politicians, and of course George Petty, of course, was the CEO and chairman. Joe O'Neill was there, and they were there to open up the officially launched the paper machine, say. And they had this big tent set up, and Susan Butler, I believe, sang there, and of course they had tables of ice with beer and wine in it. And you could go up and you could get a beer just like that, and you could go back 10 times if you wanted to. This is open to
wow.
Invited guests. So went to that. That was kind of eye opener, and you know, they were really good paper machines, and but it was the wrong product at the wrong time when you look 20 years after that. But I went in there in '89, and by '91 they were kind of thinking, you know, there were always financial constraints, and so I think they said, okay, we might have to close paper machine number 2 for, I don't know, 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever. But I think it was a ploy with the union to get them to sign the contract. But anyway, I got thinking, well, if this machine was down, and I'm just here in the last 2 years, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
I could scale, but that's got restrictions as well. It's got limitations to what you can do. So I looked at NBCC at the technology programs, and they still wanted chemistry, math for most of them, and I friggin' hated those subjects. But I found one that was computer programming technology that didn't need chemistry 12-1. So I applied, great, and then I applied to the electronics, 2-year electronics course, and I got accepted to that. Okay, so I looked up the salary for both and determined that software was the place to go. So I went into that program for 2 years, and the first day I didn't know anything about computers. We were sitting there in the computer lab, and we were running what we call mid-range computers. They were just PCs, but they were dumb terminals attached to a big computer in the background. Not a mainframe, I didn't hit those yet, but these were attached to a mid-range computer that ran applications that were custom built.
Okay, you're talking big words here. So you're talking about the old computers, the big computers that...
Well, the screens themselves were like either green or they were amber colored.
Okay.
Okay, they were not like the screens now. They had 2 colors, and that was
I
it.
think I remember green.
Yeah, well, ours were amber too.
Okay.
But anyway, so the first day I got accepted, And I went, I told my dad, I'm going to leave the paper mill and go down, take the computer course. Oh, I don't think you should do that. He didn't like that idea. And I said, I'm doing it anyway, whether you like it or not. So it was a crazy move, and most people that I knew from the paper mill, when they found out I walked out, thought I was effing crazy. Lost my mind, totally insane. What is he doing here? These machines will never shut down.
Yeah.
Okay, you wait for a while and see what happens. So most people, yes, wrote me off as insane. And probably I was, but probably smart insane. So anyway, the first day at the computer lab, I had to ask someone how to turn on the machine. I had to ask the teacher, how do you turn on this computer? And this is a course that, in theory, would lead me to program these machines in the background. So anyway, that was a really hard course, and we graduated half the people we started with. And I went from not knowing how to turn on the computer to honors. Dandy. So I think, yeah, I got married when I was in the paper mill. We had no kids. But the course was in St. John, a 2-year course in St. John. So after that I went to Blue Cross, and after that I went to NBTEL. And yeah, programming mainframes. Yeah. So I did that, and then there was an opening at the IT department at REPAP. So I applied, and they hired me, and the IT manager said to me the first day, "You won the lottery twice." I said, "What? You won the lottery twice. You worked here in the paper mill, you left, and now you're back in the IT department. You won the lottery twice." Okay, all right, whatever. So, but then of course REPAP looked pretty sketchy there around 99. Petty lost control really of it 95, and the last profit of 300 million was in 94. After that, it was taken over by hedge funds, and the banks were clamoring for their money, and shareholders were pissed off because they weren't paying dividends very well. They were always, reporting a loss,
Yeah.
right? So anyway, I could see where that was going, because part of my role was to support the payroll application, and there were some rumors some weeks that said, "I don't know if we're going to meet payroll this week." What? Part of that payroll is my money.
Yeah.
So I love the people there. I really did. If I had the choice, I would have retired there. But I knew it was going some way, and no one really knew how it was going to go. Is it going to go bankrupt, or is some outsider going to buy it and run it as a start into the North American market, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't like trusting corporations, to be honest. Their best interest is not me, it's about the profit, right? And so I said, "See you later," and then went to work in the States. The first time was the company that we worked for took over some mainframe applications from AT&T, who contracted them out, but they couldn't offshore them to, say, India, because of U.S. legislation. They had to offshore them to North America. So this company that I worked for took over those mainframe applications, and we were based in New Jersey, and I went down there with 2 Miramichi boys that they liked a good time. So they would fly us home every 2 or 3 weeks. I forget if it was 2 or 3, to be honest. 2 or 3. So on the weekends that we were free, we would hop on the transit to take the train into Manhattan. Oh my God! Oh my God!
What?
Oh. The only limitation was how much money you had in your pocket.
Oh my God!
The only limitation, you could get anything there. So, like, I'd never been in a big city like that as often as it was in Manhattan. But by the end of her, when we first started, I had my wallet nicked off me, and then you realize, well, maybe I shouldn't put it in that pocket anymore, stuff like that. So you get your ass kicked and you go back and a little more sensible, but it was wonderful. I had a really good time there. And
Sounds like a good learning curve.
yeah, and then the U.S. dollar was really high and the Canadian dollar was low, around 68.